Ever since I was in high school, all I wanted was a place of my own. I couldn't wait to move out because I couldn't stand living with my dad. And my mom wasn't much easier to be around. We were always arguing. My dad spent most weekends drunk, and the whole situation at home was just chaotic. As I got older and started caring about dating, things only got worse. There was no chance I was ever bringing a girl back to that house. So the first opportunity I had, I took it. I moved out at 18 while I was in college. I didn't leave town for school. I went to a commuter college close to home because my parents weren't willing to pay for me to attend a school farther away. For weeks, I checked apartments.com, realtor.com, and Facebook Marketplace every single day. When I finally came across a rental that looked decent and fit my budget, I scheduled a visit as soon as I could. The layout matters for this story, so I'll explain it. When you walked through the front door, you stepped into one large open area that served as both the living room and dining room. The kitchen was connected to that space, but separated by a wall. To reach the apartment's only bedroom, you had to walk down a hallway. Along that hallway were two closets, one that I used as a pantry and another for storage, plus the bathroom door. The bedroom was at the very end of the hall. It was surprisingly spacious. A queen-size bed fit without any problem. There were two more closets, and I still had plenty of room for a couple of dressers and a TV. I was sold almost immediately, especially because the rent was affordable. I moved in the following month, and everything was going well. A few months later, I went out with some friends around town, and we ran into a group of girls we already knew. I ended up bringing one of them back to my apartment. We'd known each other through school for a while, but we'd never really spent time together like that before. I'll call her Megan. We had a few drinks at my place and put on a movie, but that was as far as things went. She didn't want to do anything more the first time we hung out, and I completely respected that. Eventually, we moved into my bedroom to finish the movie we'd started in the living room. Somewhere during it, I think we both passed out because we'd had too much to drink. The next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside my bedroom. It was still the middle of the night. I looked beside me and realized the bed was empty. I got up right away, looked down the hallway, and saw Megan quietly collecting her things from the couch in the living room. She was obviously trying to slip out before morning to avoid any awkwardness, which I understood. I didn't say anything and quietly climbed back into bed. A little later, I heard the front door open and close. Just to make sure, I called out, "Megan?" There was no answer, which told me she'd already left. I settled back into bed pretty quickly and drifted off again. About an hour and a half later, I was jolted awake by a loud noise. I shot upright in bed, and my heart started racing almost immediately. I called out, "Megan?" one more time. Still nothing. I honestly didn't want to get out of bed to see what had made the noise, so I grabbed my phone and texted Megan, asking if she was somehow still inside my apartment. Looking back, I know that was kind of strange, but I was genuinely scared. I stared toward my bedroom doorway, which was still open because I'd been too lazy to close it after Megan left. I was definitely still feeling the alcohol from all the shots we'd been taking earlier in the living room, but I could have sworn I saw something wrapped around the edge of the doorframe. My breathing got even heavier. I still have no idea where I found the courage to do it, but I grabbed my phone, pulled down the quick settings, and turned on the flashlight. Keeping my phone aimed at the doorway, I suddenly realized what I was looking at. There were two hands gripping the edge of the doorframe. The instant the light hit them, the fingers tightened around the frame and then quickly disappeared out of sight. The scream I'd been holding back for those few seconds finally came out. Along with screaming in pure panic, I kept yelling, "Go away! Go away!" over and over. Once I finally forced myself out of bed, I looked down the hallway, and it appeared to be empty. I immediately turned on the hallway light. After spending a few minutes trying to slow my breathing and listening for any sound, I worked up the nerve to check both hallway closets and the bathroom.
None of them had anyone inside. Next, I made my way into the living room.
Believe me, there really wasn't anywhere someone could hide in that space. I held my phone out in front of me like it was a weapon while I slowly walked over to the nearest light switch and flipped it on. As soon as the room lit up, I felt a little safer, but I still hadn't checked the kitchen. I carefully walked to the kitchen entrance and switched on that light too, leaving the entire apartment fully lit. There wasn't anyone there. I looked behind the couch, under the tables, and even opened the lower kitchen cabinets just to be sure. As soon as I convinced myself the apartment was empty, I rushed to the front door and locked it. The strange part was that I never remembered hearing the front door close, yet there wasn't another person anywhere inside. After that, I started repeatedly calling Megan until she finally answered. When she picked up, she sounded half asleep and completely confused. I asked if she'd somehow come back to my apartment, and she told me she'd left quite a while earlier because she couldn't fall asleep there. I didn't tell her what had happened. I just said, "Forget it. I thought I heard a noise." And we ended the call. Then I started blowing up my best friend's phone until he answered, sounding just as sleepy and confused. I told him everything that had happened, and he said he could tell I was still drunk. Even so, what he said helped calm me down. He figured I was exhausted, still intoxicated, and had experienced a hallucination while waking up. Honestly, it seemed possible, especially since I never heard the front door shut. Eventually, I managed to laugh it off a little and apologized for waking him in the middle of the night. I went back into my bedroom, closed and locked the door, and eventually relaxed enough to fall asleep. The following morning, I searched the apartment again, and it was definitely empty, so I went about the rest of my day. But later on, I kept thinking about those hands I believed I'd seen wrapped around the doorframe the night before. I walked back into my bedroom and took a close look at the frame. I swear, my heart stopped for a second when I noticed clear fingerprints exactly where I'd seen those hands gripping it. I got lightheaded as it hit me that I hadn't imagined any of it. I even took a picture of the fingerprints, and I still have it saved in my iCloud all these years later. I ended up calling my dad to ask what he thought, and he basically called me an idiot for leaving my door unlocked. But he also said that since nothing had been stolen and nobody was there anymore, I should treat it as a lesson and move on. Honestly, everything my dad said during that call was true, and that's the frustrating part. I still don't know who came into my apartment that night, and I have no idea why they decided to do the creepiest thing imaginable. But once my lease ended, I moved into a better apartment and never looked back. My parents' house never really felt like a typical family home. At least, not the way most people would describe one. My dad was constantly traveling for work, and my mom was usually out with friends, spending the night at my aunt's house, or doing something else that kept her out until late, or sometimes all night. I know that probably sounds pretty messed up, but that was just how things were. It's not like they abandoned me. They were simply always busy and rarely home. By the time I was around 17, I was basically living there by myself. Most nights, I ate dinner alone, watched TV by myself, and there were weekends when I was the only person in the house the entire time. I'm an only child, and sometimes I think my parents realized after having me that they really valued having their own independence. Looking back now as an adult, I can see that it affected me more than I realized at the time. Back then, though, I actually loved it because it felt like total freedom having such a big house all to myself. I could do whatever I wanted without my parents watching over me, and I never had to share the space with any brothers or sisters. I'd invite friends over to play video games late into the night, and I could talk to girls on the phone without feeling awkward or embarrassed. It honestly felt like I had my own house without having to pay for it. Even after I turned 18 and started attending a nearby college, nothing really changed. If anything, it became even more like that. My parents were away from home even more often, and I was basically the one staying there all the time. I also knew every single sound that house made. That's important because it wasn't the kind of place where every little creak would make you nervous. It was an older, fairly large house, and it had all the usual noises that came with it. I always joked that the place just had character. This happened on a night when I knew without a doubt I'd have the house to myself. My dad was away on a work trip, and my mom had been saying all week that she was staying at my aunt's because there was a big family gathering the next day, and she didn't want to drive home late afterward. I remember her saying, "Looks like you'll have the house to yourself tonight." And honestly, I didn't think much of it. That was completely normal. I told her she didn't even need to mention it. I made myself something to eat, watched some TV, and spent the evening like I usually did. Around 10 o'clock that night, I went upstairs to my bedroom and started watching random videos online, which I could easily spend hours doing. My room was at the very end of the upstairs hallway. At the top of the stairs was a small landing. My parents' bedroom was on the left, then farther down the hall were the bathroom, the linen closet, and finally my room at the end. I kept my bedroom door open because my parents always told me to leave it that way at night, so I'd be more aware if someone ever broke into the house. I also liked hearing the normal sounds of the house. It was almost like background noise that made being there alone feel a little less lonely. Eventually, I started getting tired, so I closed my laptop and lay there scrolling through my phone instead. I'd say about an hour passed between shutting my laptop and my phone suddenly ringing. The screen said, "Unknown caller." I'd never gotten a call like that before. I stared at the screen for a moment. Getting a call that late at night from an unknown number felt really suspicious. I let it ring without answering. But as soon as it stopped, it started ringing again. That's what finally made me answer. I figured if someone called twice, maybe it was actually important. Besides, it was only a phone call. The worst that could happen was I'd hang up. So I answered, and for the first few seconds, there was nothing but silence. My first thought was that it might be one of those scam calls that checks whether a phone number is active before adding it to some call list. Then I started hearing something very faint. It took me a second to figure out what it was. It sounded like a television playing somewhere in the background. The strange part was that I could also barely hear my own TV downstairs through my bedroom door because I'd left it on earlier in the living room. The volume wasn't loud. I just liked having it on quietly in the background. The second I heard TV audio through the phone, my stomach dropped. I said, "Is anyone there?" But all I got was silence. All I could hear was the television. Like whoever had called wasn't even trying to talk. They were just listening. A second later, something clicked in my head that made me sit straight up in bed. The TV I was hearing through the phone wasn't just any television. It was my TV downstairs. The audio matched perfectly. There wasn't even a slight delay. Every word and every sound happened at exactly the same time. A chill ran down my spine, because there was really only one explanation that made sense. If the audio matched in real time, then whoever was on the phone had to be hearing my TV from inside my house. I kept trying to come up with another explanation. Maybe one of my friends was standing outside a downstairs window trying to scare me. Maybe the call had somehow glitched and was feeding back audio from my own phone. Weird things happen with technology sometimes. But the longer I listened, the less believable those ideas became. It honestly sounded like someone was calling me while standing in my living room. I got out of bed, walked over to my bedroom doorway, and listened carefully. By then, I was completely convinced. The sound coming through the phone matched the TV downstairs perfectly. Looking back, this probably wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I yelled, "Who's there?" Part of me still wanted to believe it was a friend or a family member playing some kind of prank. The call disconnected immediately. By then, my mouth was completely dry. Since it was a no-caller ID number, there was no way for me to call back. I stepped into the hallway and slowly looked toward the staircase. I could still hear the TV downstairs. Then I heard a floorboard creak. It sounded exactly like someone putting their weight on the wooden floor. But any doubt I still had disappeared a second later when I heard someone cough downstairs. That was the moment everything became terrifyingly real. At that point, I couldn't convince myself it was some weird phone glitch anymore, even though I'd already known that explanation didn't really make sense. I went back into my room, quietly closed the door, and locked it. Part of me wondered if maybe my dad was testing me somehow to see how I'd react. I even thought it might have been my Uncle Mike. I called my dad first, but he didn't answer. He was probably already asleep. It was close to 12:30 a.m., so I called him a few more times, but he never answered. Then I tried my Uncle Mike instead, and he picked up on the third ring. I could tell he'd been asleep. He asked why I was calling so late, and I started by warning him that what I was about to say was going to sound crazy. Then I asked him if he was downstairs in my house. I'll never forget the way he answered. "Jake, what are you even saying?" After I explained why I was asking, he said it definitely sounded like something his brother would do. His brother, my dad. While I was still talking to him, my phone suddenly started vibrating again. I looked down at the screen. No caller ID. I begged Uncle Mike to stay on the line for a second while I put him on hold and answered the other call. He said okay, so I switched over. I said, "Hello?" Again, there was nothing but silence. This time, I didn't hear the TV playing through the phone. Instead, I heard footsteps. It sounded like the caller had me on speaker because I could clearly hear them walking. At that exact moment, I heard those same footsteps outside my bedroom. I remember silently praying with everything I had that this was somehow my dad messing with me. Then, my doorknob started turning. Whoever was outside tried pushing the door open. Thank God it was an old, heavy door with a solid old lock. Every sound I heard outside my room matched exactly with what I was hearing through the phone. Then, whoever was outside knocked on the door. A thought hit me out of nowhere, so I merged the two calls together. The second it connected, I yelled, "Uncle Mike, it's not him! Please, hurry!" I also shouted that the person inside the house was on the phone with us. That seemed to wake him up instantly. He started screaming into the phone, "I'm on my way, you sick bastard!" The person calling from no caller ID hung up, and I heard footsteps moving away from my bedroom door. At that point, I knew it definitely wasn't my dad. My uncle told me to stay locked in my room because he was already on his way. I wasn't a little kid anymore, but I also wasn't some big, intimidating guy. I was just a skinny 19-year-old, and my uncle knew I could be in real danger. He drove straight to the house. We lived in the same town, but even though it only took him about 10 minutes to get there, it felt like those minutes lasted forever. Finally, I heard my uncle's voice yelling from downstairs, and I ran out of my room and hurried down the stairs. The second he got there, I felt a lot safer. Together, we called the police while checking around the house to see if anything had been taken. The TV in the living room was still playing. Before the officers arrived, we noticed that the kitchen window was wide open, easily big enough for someone to climb through. We told the police right away, and when they got there, they searched the house the way I imagine they normally do. They had us walk through the house behind them while they cleared each room. By then, whoever had been inside was long gone. After they finished, one of the officers asked to see the no-caller ID calls in my recent call history. I showed him my phone, and he explained that even if a call shows up that way, they can sometimes request the records and trace where it came from. He said it might take 2 to 3 days, but they'd let me know what they found. My uncle stayed with me that night, which made me feel a lot better. We left every light in the house on, like a couple of scared kids. About 2 days later, one of the officers called me back. The phone number had been traced to someone I recognized. It belonged to a guy I knew from high school. He wasn't a close friend or someone I had problems with, just someone who knew me well enough to have my phone number and my address. I hadn't seen him in years. The police asked if I wanted to come with them while they questioned him. So my uncle and I went along, since he'd been there that night from the beginning. When his dad answered the door and saw the police standing there, he immediately called his son downstairs without asking any questions. As soon as the guy came into view, I could tell he looked nervous. The officer asked him directly if he'd made those phone calls. He immediately denied it. Then he claimed his phone had been stolen a few days earlier. According to him, he'd lost it at a party and never got it back. The officer asked why he hadn't reported it stolen, and he just shrugged, saying he was planning to replace it anyway. The officer told him they might be back if they needed anything else, and that was basically the end of it. His dad stood there, watching the entire conversation, but strangely, he never said a word. There wasn't some dramatic confession or an arrest. It just ended there. That night, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. When he answered the door, was that nervous expression because he was guilty, or was it simply how anyone would react when the police showed up at their house? If his phone really had been stolen, then someone had stolen it, used it to call me, and broken into my parents' house. Honestly, that possibility was even more disturbing than believing it had been him. It started out like so many other weekends. The usual group was meeting up at Ethan's house before heading out for the night. We'd all finished college not too long ago, and we were around 22 or 23 years old. Ethan's basement was always our go-to spot before and after going out. Part of the reason was that his parents couldn't really hear us down there, but they were also super laid back. That night, it was just the four of us: Ethan, Tyler, Mason, and me. Once everyone had arrived, we figured out who was ordering the lift, and as soon as it showed up, we headed out. Several hours later, after bouncing between a few dive bars and eventually ending up at a nightclub, Ethan and I decided we'd had enough. We were both worn out, while Tyler and Mason wanted to stay out a little longer. Ethan called another lift back to his house and offered to let me crash on the pull-out couch in the basement. After we got there, he came downstairs with me to help get the couch set up. Before calling it a night, we played a few games of NBA 2K. I've never been very good at NBA 2K, so he completely smoked me. And after that, I wasn't interested in playing another round. I was exhausted and just wanted to sleep long enough for the alcohol to wear off before the hangover got even worse. Ethan headed upstairs, closed the door behind him, and I was left alone in the dark basement. The only light down there came from the small LED display on the DVD player under the TV, the faint power light on the television, and a soft blue glow coming from a Coca-Cola mini fridge across the basement. That little fridge also made a steady humming sound that was oddly calming and usually helped me fall asleep. Before long, I was completely out. I woke up sometime later and it was still dark. I had no idea what time it was, but I knew it was either the middle of the night or really early in the morning, maybe around 4:30 in the morning. My mouth was so dry that I could barely move it. I'd made the mistake of not bringing a bottle or even a glass of water downstairs before going to bed. After drinking that much alcohol, waking up thirsty wasn't exactly surprising. The problem was that I really didn't want to get out of bed. Anyone who's ever woken up hungover and desperate for water probably knows exactly that feeling. At first, I tried to ignore it. I rolled over to look toward the Coca-Cola fridge to see if there might be anything besides beer inside. There wasn't. Then, for some reason, my eyes drifted toward the opposite corner of the basement. At first, I thought my eyes were just playing tricks on me, but I could have sworn there was a dark shape standing in the corner. I didn't remember ever seeing anything there before. I kept staring, waiting for my eyes to adjust, hoping it was just a stack of storage boxes or something. Instead, the longer I looked, the more obvious it became that it was moving. It was a person. The amount of self-control it took not to scream right then was unbelievable. I didn't think it was Ethan because the figure looked much taller than he was. I knew I couldn't panic. I had to figure out how to get out of that basement. After what felt like a couple of endless minutes, I slowly sat up and let out a fake yawn, stretching like I'd just woken up, pretending I hadn't noticed anyone standing there. Then I started quietly talking to myself, complaining about forgetting to bring water downstairs, just random stuff to make it seem like I had no idea anyone else was there and was simply going upstairs for a drink instead of trying to escape. I stood up and slowly walked toward the staircase, which also meant getting closer to whoever was standing in that corner. One of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life came when I turned left to step onto the stairs. All I could think was that I hoped whoever it was wouldn't grab me.
As I started climbing the stairs, I forced myself not to run. I kept my pace slow and normal because I didn't want to make it obvious that I'd seen them. But when I got about halfway up, I couldn't resist taking a quick look back down. The dark figure was now standing at the bottom of the stairs. There was no doubt anymore. It was a person. I nearly tripped as I sprinted up the rest of the stairs and slammed the basement door shut behind me. Then I ran upstairs to Ethan's bedroom, shook him awake, and yelled that someone was in the basement and that he needed to wake up his dad. Right in the middle of all that, we heard a loud bang from downstairs. "Did you hear that?" I shouted. Ethan jumped out of bed, and we rushed into his parents' room. We woke his dad, and I told him there was someone down in the basement. Without asking a single question, he got out of bed and ran down both flights of stairs. When he got there, he noticed the basement door was standing wide open.
As soon as I told him I'd definitely slammed it shut, he yelled for Ethan to call the police, and Ethan immediately called emergency services. We also realized the back door to the house was open. After checking the basement ourselves, the three of us searched the backyard, then the front yard, and even looked around the neighboring yards while Ethan stayed on the phone with the emergency dispatcher, explaining everything that had happened. I'd guess we searched for about 10 minutes before the police finally arrived. They conducted a full search of the property and filed an official report about the incident. By the time everything wrapped up, a few neighbors had woken up and come outside to ask if everything was okay. By then, I was completely sober, completely shaken, and all I wanted to do was go home. Once the officers left, I went back inside for a few minutes to talk with Ethan and his family. After that, I said goodbye and booked a Lyft instead of letting Ethan drive me home. I honestly worried about them that night, but there was no chance I was ever sleeping in that basement again. We still hung out there before going out on weekends, but that basement never felt the same afterward. Every time I went down there, I'd catch myself looking over at that corner and thinking about that night and that dark figure.